Hey everyone, on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, we've got a continuation of last week's discussion. So this is part 2 of our 2-part series on the review of the Cyber Safety Review Board's findings of the Microsoft Storm-0558 breach. Now, last week you saw Paul Schnackenberg and I, we started diving into this topic and picking apart the findings of the review board. This week is a continuation of that. Lots to talk about, so we got more of the same for you this week. Hope you enjoy. And the other part here that I wanted to call out from this particular section, and we've talked about it a little bit already, is transparency. We talked about transparency through the lens of the public disclosure of this incident, but I also wanted to call out transparency here, and I don't remember which episode it was. We've talked about this in the past as well, Paul. When it comes to internal security vulnerabilities within public cloud services, we never hear about, oh, this internal object in this cloud, data center offering over here has a vulnerability. We never hear about internal CVEs within cloud service providers. Yep. And I think, in my opinion, there should be more transparency there. And, the CSRB calls that out several times.
They absolutely agree. And they say specifically that there should be CVEs attached to that. And so, that would lead to two things. So two things I want to mention here. First of all, as SMBs, which is the kind of clients that I serve, they obviously don't care. Like, they don't even have the bandwidth or the understanding to even look at that. But larger organizations do make security decisions based on CVEs, and they make security risk assessments based on, number of CVEs for a particular product or whatever. And if you don't have that in the cloud, you don't have an opportunity to be able to make accurate risk assessments. And if there were CVEs for cloud vulnerabilities, you would at least have some insight into that. And I think that should be regulated. I think that should be just a law. You have to. So,
especially in today's security ecosystem.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered a lot already. I feel like we covered a lot already. Yeah, and we've only been through the first couple pages of the report. We haven't even really gotten to the recommendations yet, right?
Yeah.
And so, again, kind of scrolling through here, what do you think, Paul? Should we talk about...
Well, I would talk about this quote very briefly. This was the moment that Microsoft realized it had major overlapping problems. First, someone was using a Microsoft signing key to issue their own tokens. Second, the 2016 MSA key in question was no longer supposed to be signing new tokens. And third, someone was using these consumer key signed tokens to gain access to enterprise email accounts. And they exfiltrated 60,000 emails from the State Department alone. And the other thing that we should also point out here is this is just because Storm-0558 chose to limit their scope, right? There is nothing stopping them from going anywhere else in these tenants because they had the keys to the kingdom at this point.
Exactly. And who's to say that it's not more far-reaching than it is? Now, I'm hoping it's not. They haven't said that it's more far-reaching than this, but that we haven't had full transparency up until at least what I think is full transparency now, right? So it's like that whole "fool me once, shame on you" thing. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah, that's right.
How that works.
Yeah, you got it? Yeah.
But yeah,
another one I want to mention.
Absolutely good point.
Another one I want to mention is victim notification. So this was really interesting. So both Microsoft and the FBI, and CISA, once the scope was starting to become known, were trying to notify end users that, hey, your account got compromised. But these showed up on people's accounts and on their phones, and they basically thought they were spam, most of them, and just deleted them. I thought that was interesting. And one of the things that they mentioned in this report, they should have like an Amber Alert function, so a way to notify end users in a safe and secure manner that they will actually take note of and pay attention to.
Right, exactly. And I think about that whole alert desensitization issue that we have. And that's a big issue to solve, really, because I even find myself becoming desensitized to certain types of alerts, right? Where like, there's just certain emails I get that like my eyes just glaze over them because in the back of my mind, I get these all the time and they don't ever really usually mean anything. I always make it a point to go back and look at them just to make sure I didn't miss anything crazy. But that's an issue that needs to be solved in the industry at some point, right?
Yes. I suppose the other interesting thing to point out here, which we also didn't know prior to this report, is that this actor has been active since year 2000, around year 2000. And it is the same actor that was behind the Project Aurora hack in 2009 on Google. And about a dozen other organizations that didn't necessarily, go public at the time. Google did very, very unusually for the industry at that time. And there is an excellent YouTube video documentary series on the Aurora hack that you can have a look at. We'll put it in the show notes. And they were also behind the RSA Secure ID incident. So for those of you who don't know, back in those days, when you wanted to have a secure way of authenticating yourself, long before YubiKeys and smart cards, there were little RSA Secure IDs. And basically, they got in and stole the keys for minting the material for these keys, which is how they then could compromise a whole bunch of military contractors in the US. I think that was 2011, maybe. Something like that. So I thought that was really interesting that this is the same people. So they have prior form in this game. And the other thing to point out here is that, and it's interesting, I haven't seen any politicians go down this route, but you need to be very, very careful if you go, oh, this is unacceptable. Why are the Russians or the Chinese or whoever is doing it? Why are they doing this to us? This is terrible, terrible, terrible.
I know where you're going with this.
That's what they're meant to do. They're meant to spy. And if you think that the NSA or the Australian Signals Directorate over here in Australia is not doing the same thing to them, well, then they're not doing their job. So, yeah.
Exactly. Wow. I knew exactly where you were going with that. Well, we've talked about that before. I feel like the NSA is, and NSA, if you're listening, I guess hats off for this next comment I'm about to make. You guys are much sneakier about it than other countries.
Well, and that's an interesting thing, because I think that's a cultural thing. That is a cultural thing because spooks in the Cold War, etc., it was all about not being seen. It was all about not being found out. You had to be stealthy. You had to be really stealthy. And if you look today, I think from what we're seeing from experts in the industry commenting on this, the Russians are sort of stealthy and the Chinese just don't care. The Chinese, they hack left, right, and center. They just don't care because there's no way of getting at them. You know what I mean? Like they get indictments, they get arrest warrants, but they're not leaving China, so they're not going to get arrested. So, or not leaving Russia.
Yep.
So there you go.
Yep. Well, the next thing that I want to kind of point out here is we kind of continue scrolling down the article, the report. They have a section here where they talk about, the compromise of Microsoft Exchange Online, which is how they pulled out the 60,000 emails, right? I mean, that's the essence of this attack, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the heading for this particular section. And they have a subsection here about the possession of the 2016 consumer signing key. And I want to quote this section here because it ties back with the statement I made about, hey, have you really been truthful about the situation? Fool me once, fool me twice, that statement I made just a few minutes ago. And the quote here is, the possibility that the threat actor had accessed other keys and sensitive data in addition to the 2016 MSA key also remains unresolved, adding to the board's concern about the full consequences of the incident and remaining uncertainty. So again, they even acknowledge that, we may not have the full story yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And I suppose it should also be pointed out that the CSRB had the full cooperation of Microsoft. They interviewed lots of people and obviously got a lot of information.
Good point.
So we do want to point out that Microsoft has been as open. Well, the report says they have been completely open with them, which is important, but shouldn't really have had to come to this. The other thing I want to point out is a little bit further down. So there is a lot of talk about this compromised engineer. So Microsoft acquired a company called Affirm Networks that worked in 5G technology and advanced networking. It sounds like there was an engineer that was working for that company before they were acquired. His laptop was compromised, and that was one of the ways that they got into the environment.
Interesting.
So, and they sort of can't really tie this together to the full story, but it definitely is part of the story. And that's also something new we haven't heard before. And I suppose my take on this one for anybody working with any kind of mergers and acquisitions is how incredibly important it is to do your due diligence, because you might have your house in order and you might have everybody locked down tight and the security controls locked down. But all of a sudden you got another 500 or 5,000 employees showing up at your door, and you don't know what's happened on their networks, particularly if they're startups, right? Just tying back to what we were talking about before, innovation at speed and whatever, time to market is really important. Security tends to not be super important for startups, right? Because they got to get on with it. And that could be a really, really dangerous backdoor. So that's another thing to look at for organizations.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, I look back to my time in the trenches, and whenever we would do some sort of merger and acquisition project, the two disparate environments would not even be allowed to talk to each other until we knew for sure that the security standards on the incoming infrastructure were up to scratch, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. There's a little bit of a point here that we might just mention briefly, that while Microsoft has a long-standing relationship with CISA, there was a delay because Microsoft was busy investigating and they didn't want to reach out to CISA, which resulted in parallel works, because at the same time, CISA didn't realize that Microsoft was working on this investigation, but they were doing their own investigation on how this could have happened, right, as in the early days of this. So that's a little bit of a communication issue, which is the challenge there, really.
Right.
And for those of you who, when you read the report on page 13 on the actual thing, they have an example of this unusual sign-in activity that most people took as spam and just deleted or ignored. I got to
stop there for a second. And maybe this is just me. I know I talked earlier about, kind of glazing over certain alerts. If I see in big letters like that, again, on page 13 of the report, unusual sign-in activity, I'm like red flags instantly for me. Now that's me in the security space, being a rather anxious person, right?
Yep.
That's I'm just kind of surprised that flew under the radar, right?
Yeah, but me too. But but people, we're talking about ordinary people here.
We are.
The other thing, a little bit further down, page 15, again, I'm not going to quote all of this, but they do point out that Wiz, W-I-Z, is a security company that have a lot of focus on Microsoft's product. And they talk in their initial report, so we have mentioned them when we've had previous, you and I have had previous conversations on this topic, that the scope that Microsoft outlined in their communication of what could have been accessed and what was accessed was not accurate, right? Wiz was pointing out that, look, if they had these keys, they could have done a lot more, and we don't know for sure that they didn't, right? And again, that comes back to that risk management, right? Like if you are an organization who is in the scope of these bad guys, and you don't know what the blast radius of a breach like this is, you can't make accurate risk assessments. So again, more transparency and more clarity there on from Microsoft.
Sure.
So you got anything else? Otherwise, I've got a doozy on page 17, and then I'm going to make a prediction.
Yeah. So now we're getting down into the findings and recommendations section of the report, right? So, but yeah, I'll let you take the reins on this next one, because it sounds like we got something good coming up here, Paul.
We do. So this really, to me, is when the CSRB rips Microsoft a new one, really. If Microsoft had not paused manual rotation of keys, if it had completed the migration of its MSA, Microsoft's consumer accounts environment, to rotate keys automatically, if it had put in place a technical or other control to generate alerts for aging keys, the 2016 MSA key would not have been valid in 2023. Further, if Microsoft had not made the error that allowed consumer keys to authenticate to enterprise customer data, the scope of the intrusion would have been far narrower and would not have impacted the State Department, Commerce Department, or any other enterprise customers. If Microsoft had deployed alerting or prevention to detect forged tokens that do not conform to Microsoft's own token generation algorithms, this incident likely could also have been stopped or detected by Microsoft all on its own. Even after all this, if Microsoft had other security controls in place for its digital identity systems, as the board finds other cloud service providers had in place at the time, this intrusion vector could have been blocked or detected. Finally, once State Department alerted Microsoft to the intrusion, Microsoft did not have the logs or other forensic data to determine how or when Storm-0558 had stolen the key. That's really it. This is the series on the other side, not how Microsoft described what they thought happened in their blog post, but this is if they had just fixed all these, or even one of these things along the way, this would not have been as bad as it was.
And I still can't get over the fact, and I should not be surprised by stuff anymore, but I still can't get over the fact that, how do you not have the logs? How do you not have logs on that? When you're one of the foremost technology companies in the world, and I get they're huge, 110,000 some employees, like we mentioned earlier. Still, though, when it's something as critical as your authentication and identity mechanisms, where are the logs, man? I need the logs.
Yeah. It's really, and I think this is sort of one of the reasons this happens. And if you listen to Alex Weinert's presentation from Ignite last year, where he talks about the intrusion, he talks about how they investigated it, he talks about what the systems they're putting in place to make sure this attack doesn't happen again. But it is very much we're going to fix this bit of our technology. It isn't, shit, we've really screwed up here, we need to change the whole thing and make the whole culture different. Now, here's my prediction. Maybe we should round off with it, but here it is anyway. I've been thinking a lot about this. And if Satya Nadella does not take center stage at Build in 1 month, or Inspire middle of the year, the partner conference, and really, really, really do a trustworthy computing Bill Gates style, and actually says, hey, I'm the boss and I'm taking this seriously, because I don't see him anywhere in anything related to this whole thing. If he doesn't, I don't think he's going to be running the company in 12 months. I think Microsoft thinks that they are so successful now, they're raking in billions and billions, they're the world's most valued company. I think they're doing amazing things with AI, etc. I think if they don't take this seriously, this could really come back and bite them in the rear end. And that would be my prediction. Sure. Again, no, I don't have statistical facts to prove that, but that's my prediction. That might happen.
Bold prediction. And, you know, I've not actually gone down this rabbit hole before, but I could see a sequence of events where that happens potentially. That's
Yeah. Because if the culture doesn't change, if this doesn't fundamentally change, this is going to keep happening, which brings us back very briefly to the breach that we'll just mention here. So we're recording on the 12th of April, 2024, and 2 days ago, there was another breach at Microsoft where there was a storage account filled with keys and credentials and all sorts of other stuff related to Bing employees at Microsoft, which of course could allow people to pivot further into the organization. So there's yet another sign that, hey, the house is not quite in order.
Not in order. And it's funny because, again, you mentioned we're recording on April 11th. I literally, let me see here, about 12 hours ago got home from PowerShell and DevOps Summit, where I talked about not hard coding passwords into scripts.
Mm-hmm.
And that looks like that's kind of what happened here, right? You know, we a storage server with scripts and config files containing passwords, keys, and credentials.
Yep.
I've kind of made that my mission in life is let's eliminate hard-coded passwords because it's 2024, people. We need to stop doing that, right? I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's a good soapbox to be on, a good soapbox. Couple quick quotes. Quote, collectively point to a corporate culture in Microsoft that deprioritized both enterprise security investments and rigorous risk management. These decisions resulted in significant costs and harm for Microsoft's customers around the world. The board is convinced that Microsoft should address its security culture. Then we have a little bit about the trustworthy computing memo, and then at the bottom of that, it says the board concludes that Microsoft has drifted away from this ethos and need to restore it immediately as a top corporate priority.
Yep. Agreed. Hard agree.
So the report finishes off with 25 recommendations. They're not all directed at Microsoft, but there's 25 recommendations there. Obviously not, we're going to go through all of them because you can get the report yourself and read it. But there's a couple of highlights that we want to point out. The CEO on board directly focusing on security culture, something we've mentioned before. Microsoft and all cloud security providers should take accountability for the security outcomes of their customers. Today, we bear the brunt of it. I think that shift in responsibility is important. We have the shared responsibility model, but that is not an excuse for the cloud providers to not really get their house in order.
Right. Agreed.
Logging must be included in your cloud services. Better internal logging at Microsoft for the next one. They should use per customer keys so that the scope of a breach is not so huge, and they should use secure key storage with
not all of Entra, but just a specific tenant, right?
Exactly. That's absolutely.
And I mean that's a common and long-standing security best practice, right? In limiting the blast radius of an incident, right?
Yep.
Anyway, continue.
They're talking about using hardware security modules, which is something that Microsoft is implementing, which of course is very hard because normally you have one hardware security module in one data center. Microsoft has hundreds of data centers all over the planet, so it's not exactly a simple solution. Yearly validation reviews by CISA of major cloud vendors' approaches. I think that would make a lot for transparency. Bring them all into the room and say, okay, what are you doing? What have you done over the last 12 months? How can we publish this publicly for everybody to read?
I think that goes a long ways in terms of transparency.
Yes.
We've constantly said more transparency.
Yep.
And this, I feel like, would be kind of like CISA would be acting as that independent third-party auditor role, kind of, right?
Yep, absolutely. Recommendation 11, adopting demonstrating proof of possession, DPoP. So very briefly, because I know we've talked a lot here, everybody knows we talk about OAuth 2. Well, there used to be an OAuth 1. Nobody used it. It was driven by banks and financial institutions that wanted an OAuth system, but one where you couldn't take a key from one machine to another. The resulting standard was horribly cumbersome and never got implemented. So we ended up with OAuth 2 that doesn't require that, meaning, as you've demonstrated in some of your webinars, right? Like if I can get onto your machine, I can steal your token. Now I can authenticate as you, even though you've done MFA and everything else. The solution to that is in the works, which will say, well, this key was minted on this machine, so you can't steal it and use it on another machine. And I think that's a really important one. That's obviously bigger than Microsoft, but I think it's a really important next step.
For sure.
All cloud security providers should report all intrusions by nation states to the US governments. They should use CVE process for all their vulnerabilities. And then there's a couple of recommendations around FedRAMP for the US government organizations. And that's it.
It's a doozy.
It's a
doozy.
It is a doozy.
I think that translates to other countries. I don't know if that's a U.S. specific saying or not, but
we've used that over here in we got lots of cool expressions in Australia, but yeah, we would understand that one. So
Gotcha.
I warmly recommend to everybody to have a read of the report, including their earlier reports. Both earlier reports from the CSRB are also excellent reading, but this one, it's good stuff.
And I got to say, and I think you mentioned something to this effect earlier in the episode, Paul, this being the third report by the Cyber Safety Review Board, this is excellent work, in my opinion. These are well thought out recommendations, clearly laid out, explains the problem, what their recommendations are. Like you said, I just be nice to see them have, be given a little bit more teeth in order to help with enforcement. So, but early days, and these are steps in the right direction, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few months around this whole thing.
For sure. And I have no doubt that I will have you on again to expand on this topic further, somewhere down the line, right? With the way things have been going lately. So I would like to not talk about an ongoing security incident, but I digress.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, Paul, I want to thank you for taking the time to come and share your thoughts and insights on the reports. It's always good having you, my friend.
Yeah, it was excellent, and thank you for giving me the platform to talk about this. And thanks to everybody who's listening. I hope this is useful, and these insights help you make better risk management decisions for your organization.
Definitely, and I appreciate that. And for all of you watching, if you found value in today's episode, be sure to smash that like and subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. We are also available on all the major podcasting platforms as well. So chances are, wherever you consume your content, you can find us. You can also go to hornetsecurity.com. You can get information on the podcast there, as well as along with our incredible suite of security services for Microsoft 365. Other than that, we'll let you go. Stay safe out there. Have a good one, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast. It's been a long episode. I apparently can't talk anymore. Have a good one, folks. We'll talk to you later. Thanks.